The broadcast that shook the world. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning. Across the world, people were going about their daily routines, commuting to work, sipping coffee, catching up on the morning news, or groggily pulling themselves out of bed. There was nothing special about this day, nothing to suggest that history was about to be rewritten in the most humiliating and devastating way imaginable. Then, in an instant, the world changed. Every screen on Earth, phones, televisions, tablets, billboards, stadium monitors, and even the massive LED displays in bustling city centers, flickered and went black. At first, people thought it was a power outage, a system glitch, or some sort of cyber attack. But then, an image appeared. A single, crisp, high-definition video feed filled every screen. Standing in the center of a grand alien chamber were 5 towering figures, their forms sleek and glistening as if sculpted from flowing liquid metal. Their smooth, silvery skin shimmered with an iridescent glow, shifting subtly in color like oil on water. Their large, piercing black eyes scanned the camera with an expression that could only be described as disdain. They looked utterly unimpressed, almost disgusted, as though they had just discovered a colony of insects scurrying beneath their feet. The largest of them, standing at the forefront, wore what seemed to be an ornate robe woven from strands of molten gold, its texture shifting as if alive. With an air of authority, he stepped forward, his thin lips curling in contempt. Then the voice came, smooth, cold, and flawlessly translated into every human language simultaneously. "People of Earth," the alien spoke, his tone dripping with an arrogance so profound that it sent a chill through those who listened. "We are the Galactic Dominion, the governing force of all civilized species in this sector of the universe. For over a century, we have observed you from a distance, watching as you fumbled your way through existence. Now, after much deliberation, we have come to a final decision regarding your place among the stars." A hushed silence fell over the world. It was humanity's first official contact with extraterrestrial life. And yet, there was no celebration, no joy, no moment of mutual understanding or peaceful exchange. The alien's next words shattered all hope. "We find you lacking." The declaration was brutal, a verbal slap across the face of an entire species. "You are primitive, reckless, and violent. You wage senseless wars over imaginary lines on your planet's surface. You pollute your own ecosystem for the sake of temporary convenience. Your so-called technological advancements are laughable. You barely manage to reach your own moon, and even that meager accomplishment is decades behind you. You build weapons before you build solutions. You create artificial intelligence without truly understanding it. You play with forces beyond your comprehension. In short, you are a danger to yourselves and to others." Across the world, crowds gathered in stunned silence. In New York City's Times Square, the thousands of people watching the colossal billboards stood motionless, mouths agape, as the alien's insults echoed across the city. In Beijing, late-night workers stopped mid-stride, their faces illuminated by the eerie glow of the transmission. In Moscow, an elderly woman crossed herself and began whispering a prayer, her eyes wet with tears. In Rio de Janeiro, people watching on the beaches of Copacabana began shouting, arguing, trying to make sense of what was happening. But in a small research facility in Colorado, Dr. James Cooper sat frozen in his chair, his fingers gripping a coffee cup he had long since forgotten. Unlike the rest of the world, who were too busy feeling humiliated, outraged, or terrified, Cooper had noticed something odd. The alien continued, unbothered by the growing chaos across the planet. Therefore, by unanimous decision of the Galactic Dominion, Earth is hereby placed under permanent quarantine. No spacefaring species shall be permitted to interact with your kind. No trade shall be established. No technology shall be shared. You will remain isolated until you either destroy yourselves or somehow, against all odds, evolve beyond your current primitive state. For the first time in human history, Earth had been officially declared unworthy. The alien leader raised his serpentine hand, its fingers unnaturally long and elegant, the metallic sheen of his skin rippling like liquid mercury. This is not a negotiation. This is not an invitation for dialogue. This is merely an announcement. You will accept your place, humans, and you will remain forgotten. With that, the screen flickered, and the transmission vanished, returning every device on Earth to normal programming. What followed was pandemonium. Governments scrambled to understand, respond, and control the situation. Citizens erupted into panic and anger. Streets were filled with protests, riots, and sheer confusion. News stations replayed the broadcast on endless loops, analyzing every word, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Humanity had just been rejected by the universe. But in that small research facility in Colorado, Dr. Cooper sat completely still. While the world screamed, mourned, and raged, his mind was elsewhere. Because he had seen something hidden in that broadcast. Something that the aliens had inadvertently revealed about their own knowledge. Something that might just change everything. The revelation that changed everything. The world was on fire. Governments held emergency meetings, scrambling to contain the mass hysteria that had erupted in the wake of the alien broadcast. Military forces worldwide were placed on high alert, despite the fact that there was no direct threat of invasion, only a profound insult that had cut deeper than any war could. The news media was in an absolute frenzy, broadcasting non-stop analysis of the aliens' message. The words primitive and quarantined looped endlessly across every screen. Experts, political figures, and scientists debated what this meant for the future of humanity. Some called for calm. Others called for action. Some whispered that perhaps the aliens were right. But in a small research facility in Colorado, Dr. James Cooper wasn't interested in debates. He wasn't interested in the fear or humiliation that had gripped the planet. He was interested in the mistake. Because while the rest of humanity had been too outraged, terrified, or ashamed to catch it, he had seen something important. And if he was right, then this might not be the end for humanity. It might just be the beginning. The meeting that would change the future. Inside the facility's main conference room, the chaos outside felt distant, like a world on the other side of a glass wall. Dr. Cooper stood at the front of the room, scribbling equations and diagrams on a massive whiteboard. His marker moved with intensity, his mind racing. Behind him, a dozen of the world's brightest minds sat around a long table, watching him with expressions that ranged from curious to skeptical to outright furious. Dr. Roberts, the facility director, was the first to break the silence. His voice was sharp, filled with undercurrents of rage. James, we were just called a bunch of incompetent monkeys by an intergalactic council. We're locked out of the universe, and you're up here writing equations. Dr. Cooper didn't turn around. His marker moved faster, sketching symbols and calculations as he spoke. Yes, because while the rest of you were too busy feeling humiliated, I was paying attention. A murmur rippled through the room. Dr. Wilson, a senior researcher with sharp eyes and graying hair, leaned forward. Paying attention to what exactly? Dr. Cooper stepped back, tapping the board. To what they said about quantum mechanics. A pause. A few of the scientists exchanged confused glances. Dr. Roberts sighed, rubbing his temples. James, now really isn't the time for a physics lecture. They said our understanding of quantum mechanics was flawed. Cooper's voice was measured, controlled, but beneath the surface, it burned with something else. Excitement. But the way they said it, it revealed something they don't know. Now he had their attention. The alien mistake. Dr. Cooper tapped his marker against the board, where he had written a single equation. A few of the scientists in the room immediately recognized it. Dr. Wilson's brow furrowed. That's quantum entanglement theory. Dr. Cooper nodded. Yes, and 2 years ago, we proved it could be manipulated at a distance. We just never built the technology to make use of it. A ripple of understanding swept through the room. Some of the younger scientists sat up straighter. A few of the veterans frowned. Dr. Roberts crossed his arms. "You're saying the aliens don't understand quantum entanglement?" Dr. Cooper shook his head. "I'm saying they think it's impossible." A moment of stunned silence. Dr. Wilson's eyes widened. "But we already figured it out, which means we know something they don't." Dr. Cooper nodded. "Exactly." The energy in the room shifted. For the first time since the broadcast, there was something other than rage and despair. There was hope. The plan that would prove humanity's worth. Dr. Cooper took a deep breath. "We have one chance, one opportunity to change the way the universe sees us, but we have to act now, before they realize their mistake." Dr. Roberts narrowed his eyes. "What are you proposing?" Dr. Cooper's lips curled into a dangerous smile. "We build it." A few scientists blinked. Dr. Wilson leaned forward. "Build what?" Cooper turned to the board, grabbed a fresh marker, and began sketching something new, something massive, something that, if successful, would shatter the aliens' perception of humanity forever. A quantum entanglement device, one that can transmit information across interstellar distances instantly, without relying on conventional signals, delay, or light speed limitations. The room was silent as the realization hit. If they built this, if they proved this technology worked, then humanity would have access to something even the Galactic Dominion had never achieved. Dr. Roberts exhaled slowly. "You're talking about breaking the fundamental laws of communication as we know them." Dr. Cooper grinned. "I'm talking about proving the universe wrong." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then, one by one, the scientists nodded. The work began that night. Across the world, humanity was still in chaos. But inside that research facility, a rebellion had just begun. The race against time. The awakening of a sleeping giant. The world was still reeling from the alien broadcast. Some people sank into despair, convinced that humanity had been rightfully judged as irrelevant by the greater universe. They spoke of surrendering to fate, of accepting Earth's isolation, and staying in its cosmic cage like a forgotten species. Others were furious, outraged that an alien empire had looked down on them with such arrogance. Protests erupted worldwide, demanding action. Governments scrambled to create responses, but without a means to fight back, they were powerless. But in that small, hidden research facility in Colorado, something entirely different was happening. A team of scientists, led by Dr. James Cooper, was preparing for humanity's greatest experiment. An act so bold, so unthinkable, that it would either elevate Earth to legendary status among the stars, or get them wiped out before they even had a chance to prove themselves. Because what they were about to do was impossible. And that's exactly why they had to do it. The secret plan. Inside the facility's underground command center, a dozen of the brightest minds on Earth had gathered. Blueprints, formulas, and advanced calculations covered every wall. Engineers and physicists moved like ghosts, hunched over computer terminals, whiteboards, and prototype models, working with an intensity that bordered on obsession. There was no time for doubt, no room for error. The goal: to build a quantum entanglement communication device, a machine capable of instantaneous, faster-than-light transmission across the vastness of space. A device that, if successful, would shatter the Galactic Dominion's understanding of physics. A device that would tell the universe, we are not primitive. We are not weak. We are here, and we are brilliant. But there was one problem. The technology didn't exist. Yet, a breakthrough in the making. Dr. Cooper stood in front of the main terminal, his eyes flicking between the digital projections floating in the air, blueprints for an entanglement core, complex energy wave models, and a dozen equations that, in theory, would allow them to create a network of quantum-linked particles capable of transmitting data without any delay. It was beautiful. It was elegant. It was madness. Dr. Wilson, his closest ally, frowned as he skimmed the latest data. "We're missing something." Dr. Cooper sighed. "We're missing a lot of things, Wilson." Wilson gestured toward the core design. "We still don't have a way to keep the quantum particles stable long enough to maintain a coherent signal." Dr. Cooper rubbed his temples, exhaustion creeping in. "We need a lattice, something to anchor the entangled particles in a fixed state." Silence. Then, a voice spoke from across the room. "What if we use a synthetic gravity field?" Dr. Cooper turned. Dr. Lena Park, a materials physicist, leaned over a console, rapidly inputting calculations. A localized gravity field could force the entangled particles into a more stable state. If we manipulate the frequency of the field in sync with the entanglement signature, we might be able to maintain coherence indefinitely. The room went still. Dr. Cooper blinked. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face. "That's it." Wilson's eyes widened. "That's insane." Cooper's grin widened. "That's genius." And just like that, the impossible became plausible. The obstacles in their way. But building the device was only part of the problem. The real challenge, getting the world to let them finish it. Because the moment the global intelligence agencies caught wind of their classified project, they sent agents, spies, and government officials swarming like hornets. In less than 24 hours, the facility was filled with military personnel, each trying to shut them down before they could even get started. In a tense boardroom meeting, Dr. Cooper found himself sitting across from General Richard Calloway, the hardened head of the U.S. Defense Initiative. The general's steel-gray eyes locked onto Cooper's with an intensity that could burn through walls. "Dr. Cooper, let me make one thing clear. Asterisk, asterisk." He leaned forward, voice cold, and heavy asterisk, asterisk. "If you proceed with this experiment, you could be starting a war with a species that considers us less than ants." Asterisk, asterisk. Cooper met his stare, unflinching. "Or we could prove that humanity is worth something more." The general folded his arms. "And if you fail?" Dr. Cooper smiled. "Then at least we won't die on our knees." A long silence. Then the general sighed. "You have 3 days." And just like that, the race against time became even deadlier. The experiment begins. On the third night, in the depths of the underground laboratory, the quantum entanglement device stood fully assembled. The machine was a masterpiece of human ingenuity, a massive construct of synthetic graviton stabilizers, quantum processors, and an energy lattice powered by a fusion core. It was untested. It was unproven. But it was ready. Dr. Cooper stood at the console, his fingers hovering over the activation sequence. Around him, his team watched in tense silence. "If this works," Wilson murmured, "we rewrite the laws of the universe." Dr. Cooper exhaled. "Let's make history." He pressed the button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the machine hummed to life, its core glowing with a deep blue radiance. Data poured in. The entanglement signature locked into place. And then, a signal. Not a normal signal. Not radio, not light, not electromagnetic waves, but a signal outside of time itself, transmitting across the vastness of space instantaneously. For the first time in history, humanity had broken the light-speed barrier. And they had done it without the aliens. The scientists stared at the data, hearts pounding. Dr. Cooper's breath came in short gasps. He turned to the room, his voice barely above a whisper. It worked. And then, before anyone could react, the entire building shook. An alarm blared. A red emergency light flooded the room. Then, a message appeared on every screen in the facility. Unauthorized detransmission DTKT. The scientists froze. Dr. Cooper's stomach dropped. Because the only way that could have happened was if someone had been listening. Humanity's first step into the unknown. A moment that changed everything. The emergency lights flashed crimson, painting the underground lab in an ominous glow. The air was thick with tension, The quiet hum of the quantum entanglement machine now drowned out by the deafening klaxon of an alarm that shouldn't exist. The message on every screen, UNATHORIS ED transmission DTECTED, hung in the air like an execution order. Dr. James Cooper's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing to understand what had just happened. They had done it. They had just proven that humanity could break the fundamental barrier of communication in space, that they could transmit information instantly across distances once thought impossible. But now, someone knew, and that someone had been listening. The room erupts in chaos. A dozen scientists stood frozen, staring at the screens, minds struggling to catch up with the reality of the situation. Then, all at once, the room exploded into frantic motion. Dr. Wilson grabbed the nearest console, fingers flying across the controls. "Shut it down. We need to cut the transmission before we attract any more attention." Dr. Lena Park, her face pale with dread, scanned the data feed. Too late. Dr. Cooper spun toward her. "What do you mean?" She swallowed, eyes locked on the readings. The signal. It wasn't just detected. She turned toward them, her voice trembling. Someone answered. Silence. And then, on the main screen, a second message appeared. A message that wasn't coming from Earth. A message that wasn't human. "Who are you?" The words glowed in alien script, automatically translated into English by the quantum processors. The lab went deathly quiet. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't just being observed. It was being spoken to. An impossible decision. Dr. Roberts, the facility director, stormed into the lab, his face red with fury. "Shut it down. Now." Dr. Wilson hesitated. "Sir, this could be." "I don't care what it is," Roberts bellowed. "We just broke a quarantine order from an intergalactic empire that sees us as primitive insects. If they realize what we've done, we could be wiping ourselves out before we even take our first steps into the cosmos." Dr. Cooper clenched his fists. "Or we could be proving them wrong." All eyes turned to him. Robert's expression darkened. "You don't understand what's at stake here." Dr. Cooper's gaze didn't waver. "Oh, I do. And that's why I'm not turning it off." A tense standoff. Robert stepped closer, voice low. "You're playing with fire, Cooper." Cooper exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the console. "I'd rather burn than rot in a cage." A long silence. Then, the screen flickered. A new message appeared. "Answer." And suddenly, they were out of time. The first contact. Dr. Cooper sat down, his hands trembling as he typed. He had no protocol for this. No government approval. No advisors. Just instinct. "This is Dr. James Cooper. We are from Earth." The room held its breath. Seconds passed. Then the response came. "Earth, you are not of the Dominion." Dr. Cooper's pulse raced. Whoever this was, they weren't the Galactic Dominion. He typed again, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "No, we are not part of the Dominion. We are humans. We were told we are too primitive to join the galactic community, but we just achieved quantum entanglement communication. Who are you?" Seconds turned into eternity. Then, interesting. "Humans. We AAVHEARD of you." Dr. Wilson whispered. "Heard of us. From who?" The next message appeared. "The Dominion tes PEAKs of your kind. They KALU Anastavial. Unpredictable. Dangerous." The words sent a chill down Cooper's spine. They weren't just being ignored. They were being feared. Dr. Cooper inhaled sharply and typed. "And what do you think?" This time, the response came faster. "We think they are afraid." The room went still. Dr. Lena Park blinked. "Wait. Afraid? Of us?" The screen flickered again. "They keep you KAGD. Not because you are weak, but because they fear what you may beat on. A single thought exploded in Dr. Cooper's mind. They didn't quarantine us because we were weak. They did it because they're terrified of what we might achieve. He turned to the others. We've been thinking about this all wrong. Dr. Wilson narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? Dr. Cooper took a deep breath. They're not keeping us out of the universe. They're keeping the universe away from us. Silence. Dr. Roberts ran a hand through his hair. Jesus Christ. Dr. Lena Park whispered, "What the hell are we?" Cooper turned back to the console, his fingers hovering over the keys. This was humanity's first real conversation with an extraterrestrial race, and with a single response, they could change everything. Dr. Cooper typed, "If the Dominion fears us, then maybe they should." A pause. Then the reply came. You may be more interesting than we thought." The screen glitched violently, flashing unknown symbols before shutting off completely. The room erupted into chaos. What happened? Dr. Wilson shouted. Dr. Lena Park scanned the console. The transmission. It's gone. They cut the connection. Dr. Cooper sat back, heart pounding. Whoever they had just spoken to, they had made a decision. And somewhere, across the stars, somebody was now watching Earth very closely. The fallout. The next morning, the United Nations held an emergency meeting. The secret was out. The Galactic Dominion now knew that Earth had broken the barrier of communication, and in the deepest corners of space, something else had taken an interest in humanity. Something that wasn't afraid. Something that wanted to see what humanity was truly capable of. And for the first time, the cage around Earth had cracked. Something was coming, and humanity was ready.